Hi, I'm Kathleen Stephens. I'm a retired Foreign Service officer. I was U.S. Ambassador to South Korea from 2008 to 2011.
Thank you for sitting down with us. Ambassador Stevens, we're excited to get your insights on the relations between US and both North and South Korea and what recent actions have done to impact that relationship. So, the first question we want to ask you today is, can you give us just sort of a brief overview of modern US cooperation along the Korean Peninsula?
The U.S. relationship with South Korea, since 1953, the signing of the armistice, has been a security guarantee, a security alliance, but also has grown over those now 70 plus years into a very multifaceted relationship, which of course I'd love to talk about a bit. But obviously a huge economic relationship and trading relationship, a huge people-to-people relationship with an enormous and productive Korean American community here in the United States. None
Mhm.
of those things existed in 1953 when the Korean War ended with South Korea in ruins, and in fact North Korea in ruins. And of course, we've seen in North Korea a different path, also quite extraordinary. But with North Korea putting its energies, really unfortunately, especially since the end of the Cold War, now I'm up to the 1990s, into developing nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And so the U.S. has a very long and deep and abiding relationship and interest on the Korean Peninsula. And in South Korea, I think we have an example of a place where I have to say overall, it's not that the U.S. did everything right, but it's a success story for the United States that it was
Mm.
not only the defense of South Korea in its hour of need, but it was the continuing commitment of the United States and our development programs, USAID, our assistance programs, fostered education, uh, uh, some industrial development and so on in South Korea. And the South Koreans took this in their own hands and, of course, have risen to become one of the top economies in the world. And, of course, has also blossomed as a democracy. So, a very strong and vital ally, not just to the United States, but to the international community in a whole range of
Mm.
areas, and a real success story. But also, still with the uncertain security situation on the Korean Peninsula, given North Korea's continued isolation, continued development of a nuclear weapons program, and now, of course, its very strong alliance with Russia in sending troops to Ukraine or to Russia to fight in the Ukraine war. And maybe a little more than you were looking for, but it's there's a lot of aspects to the relationship with both North and South. But it is founded on a relationship that over the years is becoming broader and deeper with time.
Given, that long history that we have with, both sides of the 38th parallel, why is a strong diplomatic relationship with South Korea, the Republic of Korea, important for US interests?
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully that was kind of implicit in some of my talking about the history, but when we talk about right now, I mean, I think it would be traditional to lead with our security interests and
Mm.
the fact that South Korea, along with Japan, are our two key allies in Northeast Asia, and in Asia as a whole. And we work with these allies in maintaining stability and security for our travel, our trade, our shipping, and to address threats in the area. So security remains very important, but the economic side is also, as I alluded to in my earlier answer, extremely important. Korea, went from being, it's an absolutely devastated country after the end of the Korean War to being now among the top dozen economies in the world. In the world. Sometimes Korea, you look at a map, it looks kind of small off of China. If you stick that in Europe, it's a major European country with an economy far larger than a number of European countries, and a very, very important partner for the United States, especially in areas that we're really paying a lot more attention to now, which is supply chains that do not depend so heavily on China or any single source, supply chains for things like critical minerals.
Mm.
South Korea is a major, major producer of semiconductors, which go into all of our devices. What we're talking on now makes this conversation possible. And for example, has an incredible partnership with NVIDIA, the American company, now one of the biggest in the world, Without those semiconductors, without those both being produced in Korea and now with the plants, the fab plants that they're building here in the United States, uh, uh, never mind AI. That's as we enter that, but what we're doing now just would not be possible. So I think there's a lot of ways in which our economies are so intertwined in technology, in job opportunities, in
Hmm.
that it really affects all of us. And I would say another thing that's very close to my heart is I just think between the Koreans, South Koreans talk about a U.S. Korea reliant alliance. They use this term in Korean, Hillmengwangae, an alliance forged in blood. They feel like there was a sacrifice for a vision of what the world should be in 1950, and obviously it's gotten a lot more complicated in a lot of ways maybe we didn't expect, but there's a sense that we deep down we share some values. We share some values. I mean, Korea struggled very hard for its democracy, and it's actually continued to struggle for it. It's had its ups and downs, but has moved steadily in the direction of defending its democracy, its way of life. And I think that it feels a real commitment to work throughout the region as a force multiplier, if you like, with the United States, with Europe, with others on those values, on those supply chains, on that vision of what the world should look like.
According, there have been two major developments in the region. First, over the weekend, President Trump announced that he was going to, quote, substantially reduce joint military exercises with South Korea. Concurrently, the U.S. is pulling the USS George Washington and its carrier strike group from its deployment in Japan to relieve the USS Abraham Lincoln, which has been deployed in the Arabian Sea for over 200 days. This marks a rare occasion in which the U.S. lacks a carrier strike group in the region. So, what does this say to our allies in the region?
I mean, in the short term, I think that there's an understanding. Japan and Korea understand how important the situation in the Middle East is. They have important interests there too. But I think that there can be some worry that if the United States' attention becomes too distracted by the Middle East, that may seem to open up an opportunity for others who may want to take advantage of it and destabilize the situation to do so. But the other thing that's happened, of course, is that the president announced, as we're speaking, it was a few days ago, that some military exercises in South Korea that are annual exercises for many, many years, that he'd ordered them to be scaled back in an effort to restart some kind of diplomatic process with North Korea. The reason I put these two together is because one, they're happening at the same time. So, but
Mm,
I think the point I want to make here is and this would apply to Japan as well. The important thing in these alliance relationship is consultation and cooperation. And I think these things are all manageable or can be manageable if there is a sense that there is a close consultation and cooperation with our allies in planning. Okay, we want to scale back the operations. We need to move some assets out of Japan. And I don't know what the consultations were with respect to moving
hmm.
the aircraft carrier out. But I do know that it was just a one-sided announcement on our side to say we're scaling back the exercises. I think it was the lack of consultation, if you like, that was kind of more serious than the decision to scale back. Because I think, again, when your allies, if you say to your allies, hey, we want to try to scale back to try to, the South Koreans want to see an opening with the North as well. They would like to support that. But when they're caught flat-footed by just hearing the announcement, this is what's happening, it kind of backfoots them and makes it harder for them to play that sort of supportive ally position. And also does begin to seem more like, can we really rely on the United
Mm.
States to be there if we are going to need them?
Are there any diplomatic advantages to these de-emphasizing of this security cooperation, both in the joint exercises and in the moving of U.S. naval assets? Let's start, you know, potential diplomatic advantages with South Korea.
Well, I mean, I don't think there's ever really an advantage to uh, diminishing cooperation.
Hmm.
Uh, I do think that adjustments can be made in your security posture in cooperation with each other. I mean, South Korea would like to make some changes in our security and alliance cooperation. They would like to make some changes in the command structure of US and Korean forces on the peninsula. Um, that's a very complicated thing to do. And the military gets very nervous about that. And, there's a lot that goes into it. But if it's done in a cooperative way, yeah, things do have to change. You can't say this is the way we did it in 1950 or 1975 or 2010, and this is the way it is forever. So I guess maybe I'm just picking at your word here, but I would say um, cooperation can take the form of agreements made
Mm,
through detailed negotiations about uh, that look at what our respective interests are and find the best way forward. So similarly, yeah, if you're talking about moving significant assets, whether it's a reduction of troop forces, I mean, that's been talked about as well and has happened in the past. And we don't have nearly as many troops on the Korean Peninsula now, US troops, as we did before. And they're different because capabilities have changed. And if you sit down and say, let's look at what's needed and what the current situation is, including in other parts of the world, and how do we adjust and how do we share the burden, not only in kind of who pays for things. And by the way, South Korea and Japan do pay for a lot of this, right? I think that's a little bit of a misunderstanding among sometimes fostered by our political leadership and in many Americans' minds. I mean, they've made significant investments, very significant, in building facilities for U.S. forces and their own forces. I mean, South Korea still has universal conscription. All young Korean men serve, regardless, even if they're members of K-pop groups like BTS. So they are very serious about their own security. Uh, so, so yes, there's always room, and there should be, for updating, evolution, whatever you want to call it. But I would keep the word cooperation, and commitment, and that's where I get into this sense of reliability. Is
yeah.
there a commitment and an understanding, and is there trust? And I'm again turning your question a little bit to say the thing that I think worries me most in terms of all these questions you've raised, and just more broadly, is that trust is no longer sort of a valued part of some of our diplomatic exchanges, if you like. And I think trust has been weakened by some of the unilateral steps that have been taken, and just by some of the yeah, and also some of the things that have been said. Right.
What are the advantages here for diplomatic relations, north of the 38 with North Korea? What are the diplomatic advantages that these moves make, on that front?
Right. I mean, for example, the notion of North Korea has long objected, I mean, for decades and decades, to U.S. troops in South Korea, and to military exercises. They call them war games, which, in fact, President Trump picked up that word. We call them military exercises, but they see them as preparations to invade the North. And over the years, South Korea and the United States and others involved in these military exercises have taken steps to try to build, and maybe the word is not trust, but a little bit of transparency, to say, to invite observers. North Korea has never accepted that, but invite observers to the exercises to explain what they are. And at times, in an effort to stimulate, encourage some sort of diplomatic opening, to either cancel them, postpone them, scale them back. That happened in 2018 when President Trump met with Kim Jong-un in Singapore. He announced the cancellation of the military exercises. Again, I don't think the South Koreans or had any objection to that, but they didn't check. But again, it's kind of Trump style. He didn't tell anybody he was going to do that. He agreed, and including our own military, by the way. But and I think similarly, if yes, of course, that's a tool that can be used to try to build some trust, confidence, or just a sense that, okay, maybe there's an opening here where we can, a face-saving way that we can go and talk. That is a part of diplomacy. Um, and I think if you look at President Trump's efforts vis-a-vis North Korea in his first term, um, when in his second meeting with Kim Jong-un in Hanoi, this is when the process fell apart. And this is a very, very difficult thing to do, but it fell apart because once the two leaders got together, there was a realization that they were just too far apart. I mean, this was a very unconventional diplomacy, and there's a place for unconventional diplomacy. It's very important to get the leaders together, but when they got together, I think there was an expectation on the North Korean side that once that happened, that this was a done deal, and on the U.S. side, there were still important questions that had to be answered and had to be agreed to. And so it left with a big rupture, which made it much harder, if you like, to kind of rebuild trust. And I think that in his own way, President Trump's trying to do that with his kind words about his personal relationship with Kim
Mm,
Jong-un, and personal relationships are important to try to see if he can rebuild some trust to go forward. But I think it's very, very difficult now. North Korea is in a different place. I mean, Kim Jong-un came back to Pyongyang kind of empty-handed, if you like, and really doubled down after that, after 2018, on growing his nuclear arsenal. And then on really forging a very, very strengthened relationship with Russia, and of course sending tens of thousands of North Korean troops to gain on the ground experience, if you like, in the war with Ukraine, and it's put North Korea in a different position too. So yeah, we'll see.
mm. And so to kind of tie the last two questions that we've discussed together, how do these two moves that we've talked about, moving the carrier strike group, um, and de-emphasizing this joint security cooperation, these joint exercises, how do those moves impact Americans at home?
I think we're going to see unfold in the coming months how the ongoing conflict in Iran is going to uh, affect Americans. It already is. And
Hmm.
in some ways I think it's been a surprise, certainly to me, and I think to many, that there hasn't not, that so far we've been able to navigate, if you like, those some of those challenges. I mean, whether they're higher oil prices, but I think we're just beginning to see the beginning of that. And this economic effect is also going to be felt and will be felt in Asia as well. Um, our allies in Asia, as well as Japan, have very important relationships in the Middle East. So I think we are at a moment where all of this is going to be felt here, and I don't want to have dire predictions, but I do think that we're at a point where it's important that Washington cooperate with our like-minded partners and allies
Mm.
to find a way that we can't separate these fields, if you like, to find a way to navigate all that's going on in this complicated area. I mean, with respect to Asia itself, I mean, I'm not predicting, nor do I expect that China or North Korea is going to say, "Aha, now's our moment. Let's strike." I mean, one has to be ready. But I think that it's very important now that we continue to work closely with our allies to try to ensure that we reassure our allies that we are still there for them.
And as much as we can speculate, what do you think the other regional actors are thinking following these moves by the United States?
My understanding is that, well, President Trump is going to be hosting the Chinese leader Xi Jinping in Washington in September, and then he'll be traveling in November to China, to Shenzhen in southern China, which is sometimes called the factory of the world, um, to for a multilateral gathering there, at which leaders from South Korea and Japan, our other allies and other countries in Asia, will also be. Um, I think it seems that President Trump is aiming in his recent public comments. A lot of this seems to be conducted through his social media and his public comments to hoping to have a meeting with the North Korean leader, who may also go to this summit. Um, and clearly that's something that if you're in Seoul, you have some stake in that too. And I think they want to be supportive. But to do that, there needs to be a sense of collaboration and cooperation,
Hmm.
and not kind of wedge driving between the two, which is what I think North Korea would like to see. That we need to speak from one voice, and Japan is important in this conversation as well as China. So again, kind of a multilateral approach, I suppose, is what I'm talking about. So we'll see. I mean, it indications now, this could change obviously over in the coming weeks, is that the North Korean leader is uh, playing a little hard to get, and would very much like to see the U.S. or the president acknowledge. I mean, they've been North Korea as a legitimate, if you like, nuclear weapons holding state, and that's a move that would have a lot of implications, in particular, given the stance we've taken vis-a-vis Iran, which does not have an advanced nuclear weapons program at this point, and the steps we've taken there if we were to reverse our approach on North Korea vis-a-vis nuclear weapons, that would have big implications.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Ambassador Stevens. We really appreciate you shedding some light on a really complicated and historical problem set. So thank you.